Hi, Jackson. How are you doing?
Doing okay. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. This is meaningoflife.tv. I am Philip Menchaca, project coordinator at Union Theological Seminary, and I am talking with Jackson Stephenson, who is at the University of Washington graduate program, where you study Southeast Asian religions and
Oh, South Asian in particular, actually. But that's generally what I'm trying to focus on.
South Asian
Yes.
religions, and in particular, and Sanskrit as well.
Yeah, I'm doing the heavy load of Sanskrit while I'm here.
Yeah. And then you also have an interest in a kind of unusual area, which we're going to talk about today, which is the adoption of tantric and occult ideas in extreme metal music.
Yeah, indeed.
And this is not something that I had thought of as an area of study before, but I have an interest in popular adoption of religious ideas, and so I'm excited to talk with you today. I'm curious, how did you get interested in that particular area?
Oh, well, it was kind of a long track. So at Humboldt State University, where I did my undergrad, I was doing Hinduism studies, and somehow I found this band called Rudra, who are they're from Singapore, and they've created what they call Vedic death metal, and it sounded interesting. And then I watched this music video they have called "Hymns from the Blazing Chariot," and it was an adaptation of the Bhagavad Gita in technical, brutal death metal format, and it was really like powerful. Like I'd never seen such a thing before. So that was the first band I ever found that mixed. And they're from Singapore, but they're all third generation immigrants from Tamil Nadu, so they're Indian, and it's a specific it's a manifestation of their devotion to and practice of Advaita Vedanta philosophy, and the idea was just so fascinating, and I wasn't really into metal at that time, but just
Mm.
the idea of such a band was just you know inspiring. And through that, I just browsed more, and then found like a wealth of bands. And then by about 3 years ago, I had enough that I decided I could probably just start presenting papers about it because it's kind of an out there topic, and us scholars love novel ideas. So
If they're out there topics.
yeah, so I just started presenting a series of papers at the American Academy of Religion, and they were well received. And I'm not really doing much with that focus now, but I still collect the vinyls and try to stay in touch with the scene and everything. So it's kind of a fortuitous route, and something I still really, even though I don't study it right now, it's still something that I really like and passionate about.
Now, I want to kind of give listeners a bit of an idea of what the music is like, because it's not. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not like what people may generally think of when they hear the word heavy metal or something. It's not like Black Sabbath. This is different,
Yeah,
right?
it's yeah, about 10 steps over the line in terms of musical edge and transgression. So I actually, yeah, I remember at every single paper that I present at the AAR, people have wanted me to play music, and I'm always so like reticent about it because I mean, the U.S. government has literally used heavy metal and extreme metal as torture music in Guantanamo Bay. So subjecting my audience to it isn't
It's
out of compassion. That's not really what I want to do. So it's
it is tough to listen to. I listened to a little bit, before this, and it's very the lyrics are incomprehensible. Really, they're growled. I mean, you can't
yeah,
understand what they're
right.
saying. I find it difficult to listen to.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not everybody's cup of tea. That's definitely for sure. I mean, it took me years to be able to appreciate it, to be honest. And there's still some stuff that I'm like listening to. I'm like, it's like spicy food. There's a
yeah,
certain level that some people can get into, and some other levels that other people might be more into. And then there's a point where it's not enjoyable. So what's the point?
yeah,
So yeah, it's not for everybody in that regard.
yeah. So let's kind of can you talk a little bit about this relationship between metal music and modern
Well,
occult?
So in all three of the papers that I presented, there I've used as a central concept to introduce it this concept of the cultic milieu, which is it was adopted it was coined by um, a scholar named Campbell in the 1972, and it basically refers to like an underground like matrix in which people who identify slightly outside of the mainstream order, even if people come from different like points of view, just the fact that they're outside of the mainstream social order, they tend to come together into what's called the cultic milieu. So it's a milieu of various peoples that will have just maybe remarkably different beliefs, but they have shared interests and shared communication structures is another important aspect. So they might read the same magazines or listen to some of the same music or whatever. In the case of occultists and metal, well, Black Sabbath, from the very first parts of their career, they were, played a lot with occult matter. I mean, it's really lighthearted, and nobody really thought they took it seriously. But within heavy metal, there's always within extreme metal, there's a movement to keep upping the ante and become more and more intense and brutal. So then there's a subsection that actually does take it seriously. And so just the fact that occultists are also kind of under the radar, but and kind of opposed to the mainstream social order, and the same thing for extreme metal, it causes them that they talk to each other. And so some like occultists may become interested in metal music, and some metal artists may become like introduced to occult concepts through metal music, and so they mutually reinforce each other, and they work pretty well into like a single product in that way.
Mm. And so some of these bands, they're really explicitly satanic in some cases, and I mean that broadly, in where they engage in kind of occultic practices that are usually considered transgressive or off limits for various reasons for other kinds of occultist practitioners. They're not just playing with the ideas to be transgressive, but they're actually practitioners of this. Some of these extreme metal bands, correct?
Yeah. It's hard to tell because with the music, there's a huge emphasis on performance. So, it's for trying to see if somebody's authentic or not, or really all about it. It's almost kind of like hard to tell, and it's kind of, I don't know. I'm not about to like tell an artist that you only just talk about it, you don't perform it. But
right.
there's definitely a tension in which like there's a kind of cultural cachet and capital to be conceived as a true practitioner and a true metalhead, but it's so, I don't know. I don't. It's kind of hard to tell. There's one scholar in the field, Kenneth Granholm, who has said similar things. Like you can't really tell between the true practitioners and people who quote just use them. It's kind of it almost misses the point, and it's kind of the boundaries are just so almost academic and second order that it's kind of I don't know. It's not somewhere that I particularly research.
Right.
I like to focus on the discourses themselves, and I just take it for granted that these people do. This is like a legitimate and sincere work of art, which I think it is in these cases. So
Yeah, well, it's just interesting to see how it's used in general. The point is the use and the context and how they're adopting these kinds of ideas. And I wanted to talk just a little bit about Tantra, and specifically I think relevant here is the Tantric idea that practices that are usually seen as off limits or transgressive or corrupting can be harnessed for liberation. And that is a traditional Tantric idea, but it has been kind of adopted by the modern occult movement, correct?
yeah, it's. I mean, if you consider the figure of Prometheus, who brought the secret of fire to humans, even though it was off limits by Zeus, the idea that there are certain things that are off limits by conventional or mainstream or hegemonic like notions of religion or power. Those very things, by adopting them can be sources of power. And within Tantra, that's definitely a unique and salient aspect to it. I'm currently in the midst of 3 research projects about Tantra, where I'm trying to delineate what that word actually means, because it kind of breaks down, as all things. I mean, you can't, studying religious studies and trying to study categories really demonstrates the Buddhist concept of emptiness when you really look at how these things are kind of just words projected onto phenomena. So there's a specific current that I call the scholars call the Kaula current, which definitely is the hardcore transgressive tantric in that regard. And they did use the the most famous or rather infamous ritual is the 5 M's ritual, where you have meat, alcohol, and fish, and what's commonly translated as parched grain and sexual intercourse with a woman who's not your wife, as a kind of almost like a satanic black mass against the social order, in which in a ceremony that you would direct the goddess's energy into yourself. So all that is directly antithetical to the normative mainstream religious order. And occultists themselves, they see themselves as sort of they're dealing with forbidden knowledge themselves by studying alchemy or the occult. That they're not maybe satanic explicitly, but they're definitely looked at askance by the normative powers that be. So with the introduction of Hindu and Buddhist elements into modern occultism, the Tantra it's been easily taken up in this regard by occultists, because the 2 ideas, the idea of seeking power through what lies outside of the mainstream social order, that idea just is amenable to both, and it really works well. And then with tantric metal music, I mean, you see that, just the apotheosis of all 3 of those threads: metal music, outside the grain, occultism, playing with powers that are kind of not mainstream, and then Tantra, definitely far outside of all those mainstream categories, coming together into a single genre of music, and it actually works quite well. They all, all those elements operate in lockstep and really create an authentic and sincere genre of music that I really appreciate.
Yeah, they all have this. They all have the goal of being against the established order, so it makes sense that they would, when you combine those 3 things, they'd appeal to people in that milieu. So there are 2 particular figures that are invoked in some extreme metal, some occult, that I want to talk about. First is Kali, Hindu goddess, and the second is Lilith. We'll talk about them in kind of in sequence. Just first, who is Kali, and kind of what is she, and we'll get into that.
Well, we see her everywhere in modern day, New Age and goddess circles.
And she is she's a traditional, there's been a long history of.
Oh yeah, her first appearance is in the Devi Mahatmya, a section of the Markandeya Purana, which you could date maybe around 500-600 CE, where she appears as a really wrathful manifestation of the goddess who carries out her maybe less wholesome aspects. But then, and later, especially within tantric traditions of the Kali, Kula, and the Krama, which I'm currently researching, the Krama particularly, she is the goddess par excellence, the most extreme form that the divine energy takes. And she's been really influential throughout all of the tantric traditions in Bengal to this day. Practitioners worship her in the temples, and Dakshin Kali, and then Assam, although that's Kamakya, it's not Kali, but she's a really influential tantric goddess that appears almost everywhere in India today. Although there's been kind of a whitewash. I want to say that's kind of a strong aspect, but in the past few centuries, she's kind of been tamed and domesticated a bit, so that it's kind of her less transgressive aspects a little bit more amenable to a bhakti environment. So she's kind of been slowly domesticated. But
And
she's been
what do you mean by bhakti environment?
so she's made a little bit more mainstream and amenable to popular worship and devotion. Because worshiping a bloodthirsty goddess who wears dead babies as earrings and uses rotting flesh as makeup isn't really
It's a PR nightmare.
Yeah, it's not most people perhaps don't want that as their main Ishta Devata that they worship. So they kind of bring her back, make her more motherly, make her a little bit more like the mother you'd want to have instead of this insane projection of feminine power in that way.
And so is she associated with feminine power, with
It's tricky.
creative forces? What kind of things does she stand for?
Well, there's a number of traditions in which she can stand for any number of those things. Within the Krama, that's what I'm researching right now. Her most profound and secret form is called Kala Samkarshini, which is the ground of consciousness itself. So, if in this non-dual worldview, the entire universe is just the outflow of divine consciousness, which is the goddess. So there's the substrate consciousness, which is Kala Samkarshini, which devours everything into itself. But she also creates compulsively, and so that's why the world exists. That's why it's really hard to meditate, because as the goddess of consciousness, she just flits and creates, and so numerous thoughts just come into your mind, and it's hard to, That's why
so the reason I have trouble with meditation is because of her?
Yeah, because the goddess is so intent on creation that you have to embody more Shiva aspects in order to tame her, quote unquote.
And Shiva being another
her consort, the male aspect of divinity in that concept. But within the Krama, emphasis is definitely more on the feminine ground, which is Kala Samkarshini, and then Shiva would be kind of the organizing principle. That's kind of, Kali, in all the depictions of Kali, she dances on Shiva's corpse, so he's there, but he's not, he's kind of like not foundational, but like an organizing principle that kind of keeps her sort of in line. There's a phrase, Shiva without Shakti is a Shava, a corpse, but then without Shakti without Shiva is just uncontrolled chaos that just destroys everything. So
you need both. You need the creative force and then something that kind of tames it and organizes it. Is that the idea?
Yeah, and that plays out throughout all of the, not all of the Tantric traditions, because there's definitely a strain of right-handed Shaiva Siddhanta that doesn't worship the feminine at all. So on the left-handed side, there's definitely a balance. And what that balance, what balance that consists of, whatever emphasis is given on the Shaiva or the Shakti side depends on the tradition.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's an important thing to note about religion in general. It's so difficult to talk about specifics sometimes because there is such a broad range of beliefs. But I just want to go back to one thing that you said. So you mentioned right hand and left hand. Can you say what you mean by those?
Okay, so I'm using that as a shorthand for different forms of tantric practice. So when I'm using right-handed in this particular context, I'm referring to the Shaiva Siddhanta, which is kind of the more foundational Shaiva tradition. So around the time of maybe the fifth century, within mainstream Shaiva circles, there was created an esoteric teaching in which a practitioner, rather than just practicing the mainstream Shaiva principles, he would be able to undertake an esoteric initiation, which consists of doing mantras and doing different mudras and different recitations and purifications. At death, he would be able to ascend from this universe and become a Shiva himself. So it was like a higher teaching than what was taught in mainstream Shaiva circles.
So this was a way to gain divine status of some kind?
Yeah, it was. But it was also definitely within the realm of Brahmanical social mores. So there's no drinking menstrual blood or associating with those beneath your caste. These are Brahmins who are associating only with Brahmins. and who are also in charge of rituals throughout the community. So they would come to bless like a morti at a different temple or whatever. And then so that's the right-handed, kind of the more foundational aspect of Shaiva Tantra. But then on the left hand, there's the left hand of the equation. There's an influx of what we identify as a Kaula current. And what I'm talking about right now is the subject of a research paper that I'm doing. So I'm hoping that what I'm saying now won't be contradicted by what I find in the next few months. So basically, but on the left hand, there's an influx of Kaula, more goddess and Shakta oriented material that's far more transgressive. And the mutual intermingling of the right-handed Shaiva and the left-handed Shakta traditions kind of created the whole of the post-Shaiva Siddhanta textual corpus. And so it became more and more left-handed. And so each generation of revelation would base itself upon material that was already created. Because it's, if you're creating a text, it's hard, you don't want to necessarily create everything from scratch. If you have a system in place, you could just use that and then put your own unique contributions within that overall system. But this new system would still kind of transcend and be above the previous system. So there's a ladder of revelation going up and up and up and getting more and more left-handed as each tradition sought to outdo the previous tradition, so to speak. And then as it gets to be more left-handed, it goes from the right-handed, more dualistic tradition to the non-dual tradition of the Kaulas, in which everything is just unbounded consciousness, and there is no essential difference at all between you and the deity itself. All is just the consciousness, and in the malas, they keep you enchained, and in this form are not physical objects as they are in the Shaiva Siddhanta. They are just ignorance that you, through your meditative practice, you overcome, and then you realize that you are one with the deity or the goddess in this context.
Okay, and now left hand is used in the occult.
Yes.
Specific meaning of more these transgressive kind of practices. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, so the genealogy of that term, the left-hand path, within modern occultism is kind of a tangled one. And that's another research project that I want to undertake, is how... Because the Sanskrit term Vamachara literally means left-handed practice, and then Vamamarga means the left-hand path. So you find these within the text, and I'm currently working through how these terms are worked, or how these terms are used within the texts themselves.
So that'll be a subject for further conversation, another conversation.
Yeah, so, and as to how that connects with Western occultist usages of the left-hand path, that's something I really have to do research on. There's one scholar, Kenneth Granholm, who's done a lot of research on the left-hand path in modern occultism, and his work is really foundational to the field in that regard. And he's traced a distinct current in that regard, but I would like to bring more from like the supposed tantric progenitors of that term to the conversation and see how the two talk to each other.
Yeah, and in this extreme metal music particularly, the term left hand is generally used as it is in modern Western occultism, which is the kind of the more transgressive path, for a lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's then move on to Lilith, because this is another figure who features prominently in some of this extreme music. And then we'll talk about how these two figures are featured, particularly in two specific bands, Weapon and Dissection, and kind of what their use means in a broader context and the interpretations of these two figures. So Lilith is someone who maybe a lot of people in the West are already familiar with from biblical stories or the larger biblical literature, since I think she only appears in the Bible in one place, I think, Isaiah.
Yeah, in Isaiah, yeah. It's the term translated in the New King James Version is screech owl, which speaks of a connection there. But the Lilith herself as a goddess appears nowhere in the entirety of the Hebrew Bible. So it's her story was developed later in the alphabet of Ben Sirach of around the 10th or 11th or 12th centuries, and that's where the story that people are mostly familiar with took place, in which she was Adam's original wife, and she refused to submit to him, and so, and then she was banished, or she banished herself actually within the story from the Garden of Eden, and then from then on would prey on humans, on infants if they were not protected properly. But actually, the term lil or the substrate for that term goes back to thousands and thousands of years to
like Sumeria, right?
Ancient Sumerian kings list. So it's actually an old concept that was kind of a part of just the greater ancient Near East cultural matrix. So it goes back extremely far in that regard.
And in popular culture, I guess she's come to represent divine female empowerment.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. She was not about to lie beneath and let Adam subdue her. So she's very popular in that regard.
So let's talk a little bit about how these two goddesses are used in the music of Weapon and Dissection.
So within both groups, she has really unique importance within the Qliphoth Kabbalah. So within the modern world, we're very familiar with the Sephiroth, and the Tree of Life of the Kabbalah. So we have the 10 power spheres of God, all the way up from the top, all the way to the bottom, Malkuth, which is the world where we're at. But within the actual Kabbalah literature, each power sphere also has its negative side, which are called the Qliphoth. And so each of the 10 spheres has a corresponding anti-Sephiroth or the Qliphoth. And within the
these spheres, I don't want to get too far into this, but what are these spheres?
So they're just different power zones different zones of power within the 10. Now I'm not a Kabbalah expert, but I've done a lot of just secondary reading on the Qliphoth just to get myself up to speed with what all this stuff was. So within Kabbalah, there are 10 spheres of which God manifests his energy from the top all the way down to the bottom, and at the bottom is where it manifests in us, Malkuth, which is the world that we live on. But on the opposite side, there's as I said, there's a negative aspect to each of these, and on the negative side, Lilith actually is a power zone that corresponds to Malkuth. So the realm of Lilith is actually all around us, and the way to experience her is you have to just try to find her. That's the first challenge. You have to find her in the everyday world. So she's there lurking because the two worlds, they intermingle at a certain part. You just have to find her. And so in that regard, she's the initiator into this anti-realm of Sitra Akra, as it's called. And so she's the mother of the Qliphoth in that way, and the initiator in there. And within Weapon and Dissection's music, her womb is the gate to Sitra Akra, in line with Qliphoth Kabbalah principles. So, so she has a very particular role in that regard. And then, do you want me to move on to Kali?
Let's talk a little bit about Kali and exactly, why she's chosen as a figure to be invoked in this music.
Yeah. So in the paper I presented at the American Academy of Religion Western Region in 2015, I talked about how both, Lilith as a goddess who preys on children also preys on men and gives them nocturnal emissions and all sorts of things and takes their energy from them in forms of marriage that are not sanctioned by rabbinical models. She fits like the idea of a succubus who comes and preys on men. And actually, in medieval India, yoginis and matrikas and dakinis and shakinis had
divine beings, right?
Semi-divine.
Semi-divine beings.
They're kind of ambivalent. So within modern yoga circles and in Tibetan Buddhism, yoginis and dakinis are given a really positive valence. But they're a little bit more seen more ambivalently in medieval India. So, there's the ideas that within specific places like cremation grounds or forests, they were home to numerous horde of nocturnal beings, of different beings like yakshas or nagas. And there's some of them are friendly, some of them not so friendly. But you always had to protect yourself from them. And so matris are an early instantiation of this. And there's a feminine being that would prey on men. And another word for them is called grahi, which comes from the Sanskrit root grih, which means to seize or to grasp. So actually, in numerous philosophical texts, of Indian philosophical texts, the word for subject is grahaka, that which seizes something, and then object is grahya, which is that which is seized. And then also within Hindu astrology, the planets are seen as the Navagraha, because each planet is called a graha because it can seize you and have different astrological impacts upon you. And so this overall concept of seizing or like taking hold of something is implicit within this word grahi. So these feminine seizers would be able to literally seize and possess people, especially men, if they venture too far or upset them or whatever. And then the yoginis kind of they took all of those concepts that were already present within the matris, but they kind of upped the ante and made them a little bit more ambivalent. And then, of course, as we know, tantricas go towards everything that is forbidden. So, who else to seek wisdom from but these voracious yoginis out in the cremation grounds? And so you could see, like, I don't want to say a connection, but a really close similarity between yoginis on the one hand and succubi on the other. And this was a concept that I really talked about in that paper that I presented. Is that you have these very similar ideas of female demonesses, for lack of a better term, in both these really far removed cultures. And so, one interesting project is to try to see what the connection is, if any. I mean, that'd be a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
You have to do Hebrew for that. And so, in the music of both these artists, their encounters with Kali and Lilith are described in very intensely aesthetic, sexual, but frightening forms. So there's a quote here that this is from the song Liber Lilith by Weapon. So she's praised the vile temptress, the goddess of Drakon, initiator of perversion in mankind. And then later she's beseeched to ravage the narrator and permeate his dreams and engulf and molest him within her womb. So it's like really intense aesthetic like imagery that they're playing with. And within dissection, you get similar things in which Lilith is praised. She's praised as a dragon goddess, initiator of dark dreams, and bringer of Luciferian light, forbidden knowledge. We see again, and she's beseeched to cleanse us with the black flames of her beauty. And then ultimately, after all this is all this imagery is put into place, in which dark dreams, forbidden light, dark beauty, and bloodthirst are like brought together. She's implored to open now the gate that is her womb. Come forth through the gate, open now wide the Qliphot's shell, open wide the gates of hell, and lead us to the kingdom of chaos, where the dark gods forever dwell. So you can see that, that she is in the Qliphoth Kabbalah, she's the gateway to the Qliphoth, and so in order to find her, you have to go out and go into specific trances in dark places that you ordinarily try to keep yourself away from. So
is the idea that by invoking these two figures, there's accessing this forbidden power, and that these two figures are a way to reach some kind of liberation through this power?
Yeah, I mean, I think the metaphor of Prometheus is always the best one. There's a power in what is forbidden, and so if you can harness it properly and not destroy yourself in the process, there is great power to be held there. Because these are powerful forces. It's like playing with fire. You can it is possible to go to great places and raise yourself up as a god, but the Tantric scriptures always say, this path is not for everyone. By those very means that lead other beings into hell, we can ascend to higher states. But, if you fall off and, screw up, you can go to the deepest, darkest hell and be there a long, long time. So,
And I think you can understand why this is attractive, right? Because if you can harness these, then that must mean you're pretty special, right? That must mean you're elite,
It's pure elitism. I mean, to
right?
be honest, like the fact that you can, go against society's mores. I mean, there's no, it's no coincidence that people in this milieu read Nietzsche, and that sort of literature, because they definitely are trying to be Ubermensch and transcend the ordinary religious order.
Yeah. And one thing that's striking about the use of these two particular figures is that they are female, and that there is this fetishization of female divinity, when these groups are almost always, the heavy metal scene, the extreme metal scene is male. Heavily male.
Yeah, I mean, so these are men's goddesses, and that also another aspect that I wanted to hit on in that paper is that, what does it mean when, an extremely, like L-dominated movement, pledges allegiance to these really outrageously powerful goddesses? Like, what does that mean? And then, of course, where are the flesh and blood women in this movement? It's kind of, it questions whether goddess worship in and of itself leads to, feminine liberation. So it's kind of, it's something that's really striking. Is that how do you make sense of that? So it's it's a really important thing to take note of.
That's an interesting point. It would seem to me that this kind of goddess worship is in not any way promoting female power. In a way, they are using a female goddess to promote their male power.
Yeah,
it would seem
one way to look at it. And I'm trying. I don't want to be too critical of this, because it's we're all flawed humans in this world, and we can't always be perfect. So it's definitely it's a different kind of practice, and it's not just reveals a different set of priorities by different peoples. And I will say that on the last track of the Dissections album, Rain Chaos, which is their most Temple of the Black Light themed album. Yeah, there is
Temple of the Black Light. This was a cult order that the lead singer was involved with.
Dissection. Yeah, he was a member of, and he was kind of the main ringleader of this group before he left this earthly plane by releasing his soul in a satanic ritual, which the police say he blew his brains out while reading a copy of Liber Azerate. So
Liber Azerate, that's a satanic text.
That was the official grimoire of the, as it was called then, the misanthropic Luciferian order. I don't really like Jan Notveit a whole lot. He's the front man of that group. I mean, he's an uber, when you just read the stuff he did. I mean, he's a great musician, but being a great musician doesn't mean you're a great person. I mean, he went to jail for murdering a homosexual man. Because his group they were like the cream of Satanists. So they were talking about doing a human sacrifice for a while. And they were talking about, all the other members of the band and our group, they kind of quit at the idea of human sacrifice. So maybe maybe they could be, nominees for this human sacrifice. Maybe we could sacrifice them. And then Jan also thought, maybe we could sacrifice my girlfriend, not tell her what's going on and kill her. So, and then they ran into this Algerian homosexual man in Sweden, and he made them uncomfortable by just being gay, and so then they killed him in the in the park. And so that is so really outrageous to me, because if you're part of a group that explicitly identifies as being against the grain,
on the fringe,
and anti-normative mainstream social order, and you like being an outsider from outside of the chosen country, or land of origin. I mean, killing a homosexual man isn't that transgressive? You're just kind of promoting the ideal of the mainstream Christian church, which is what you claim to be against. So there's so much ridiculous, I don't know.
This does bring
Like,
me to another question, and maybe we should wrap up with this. But I mean, in what sense is this? This is kind of this is a difficult question because I know that this is one particular group and one particular person especially. But in what sense is this kind of milieu, this way of looking at the world, productive? I mean, it does
uh,
lead to sometimes these kinds of things.
well, I mean, this very world is a place of suffering and confinement. So, like, what does this world matter if you're trying to ascend and become your own god? You know, there's kind of that assumption there.
So it doesn't really even
Yeah,
because the world that we live in is so corrupt. It doesn't really matter what kinds of things you do if it brings you to a higher plane.
yeah, that's the idea. And I don't. Granted, I spent years, not as a practicing Buddhist, but I spent 9 months in Kathmandu doing Sanskrit and doing my Buddhist practice. So the idea of helping other sentient beings is pretty well ingrained into me. So when I read this, I kind of like, I'm really interested in it, and I can see what they're getting at, and there's a certain sympathy I have for it, but. I just don't think there's anything productive in bringing somebody else down and bring yourself up. I think that's just, I think that's kind of self-defeating. And, this is, you are playing with fire when you're breaking all the rules of religiosity and and what is moral and immoral. So, if you mess up and decide, oh, I'm just, this is against the order, I'm going to do that. Well, on the mundane plane, you could, go to prison, as Jon Nudvai did. But, what about, in the hereafter? Like, what, if you develop such karmic, like imprints on yourself and you're not as adept as transmuting it as you say you are, where are you going to go after that? So it's, it's tricky.
Yeah, I mean, that is an interesting point, too. If you believe in an afterlife or samsara, this cycle of death and rebirth, it's a pretty high-stakes game to be doing these kinds of things when the consequences could be eternal damnation, or you get reborn in the Buddhist world, like one of these awful hell realms where you have a giant stomach and a tiny mouth, so you can never eat, and that kind of thing. So it's definitely it's a mindset. I'm not. It's hard for me to understand, I guess, but it is interesting. All right, I think that we're around 40 minutes. We should probably wrap up. And I just want to thank you for coming on. This is really fun conversation. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's great to be on here.
All right, thanks, Jackson.